which needs to be mentioned as to why I'll be the one kicking off the event tonight. But tonight it is much more important that I'm introducing a dear friend, a colleague and a dear friend. Mr. Moskowitz, or Ken, as I'm used to calling him, has been a long time colleague and friend, exactly because he does the job that I do. We are all in the diplomatic field, but more importantly because he served in Bulgaria in interesting and important times. By the way, there is always an opportunity to serve in interesting times in Bulgaria. It's not entirely lost, so there is plenty of opportunity for the next the generation of diplomats. And actually, this is how we came to know each other. And with a very powerful, very strong cultural office and it used to be even center in previous years, of the United States of America in Bulgaria, this has become one of the very strong branches of U.S. representation in the country. If I'm to really do the fast backward, I should say that there were times when the culture office was kind of a retreat place for many of us, where on invitation, not everybody, complicated times, we would be invited to watch a nice movie or have a cultural program which was otherwise unavailable. So I must say that I've always had not only communication but also an enormous affinity and appreciation and gratitude for the work that you've been doing. Because at the end of the day, the political levels, they do the official, many times scripted, well-controlled diplomacy, and the area where you could really leave that very formal arena was the cultural field. Ken did something totally unprecedented. He even went to school in Bulgaria, doing a doctoral thesis in drama, or actually he went even further, how American drama is depicted, presented, adapted in Bulgaria. Now, and I should probably here say something which you don't know, that few of my own colleagues and friends know either. Actually, American drama was my major in my grad studies, and I did Tennessee Williams. So when Misha, my colleague here, when he mentioned what you'd like to share with our audiences, I said, oh my God, I have so many reasons to be here and to introduce this very important book and research that you've done. Actually, there are a few people who understand American literature and American drama in particular at home. And this is why it is so precious that you have an interpreter who, in the face of Mr. Moskowitz, in the person of Mr. Moskowitz this time, who knows, of course, what he's writing about, the American literary drama art, but also knows who for. So to do this kind of bridge, cultural bridge and interpretation really demands both knowledge and dedication. And I thank you so very much. You touched my heart with, especially with the American drama thing, and thank you for doing this service, because you're doing service to both your people but also to my people. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. Okay, and my name is Assen. I will serve tonight as a moderator, I hope, of one interesting, energizing, open conversation about American plays and how they were not just adopted, but how they were presented to the Bulgarian public and how Bulgarian public reacted to them. And of course, I am honored to be here tonight, and I'd like to say to you how I met Ken. It was in 2009. I am the president of Bulgarian Community Center here, which deals with cultural, social, and other community affairs. And I was exceedingly grateful to meet Yoko and Ken and to see the energy in their eyes about Bulgarian culture and perhaps Bulgarian traditions. And as many of you perhaps know, Ken has been around the world, Ukraine, Bulgaria, Japan, served as a public affairs officer, and he obviously is a very open-minded man because he adopted many, many pieces of those cultures, and moreover, he currently is making living out of one of those cultures. So, while Ken left to Bulgaria, we keep our friendships, and over those years when he was in Bulgaria, for example, I keep reading his blog about Bulgaria, about places that he has been, mountains, villages, historic towns and places. And I was so excited to see an American deeply in love in our culture, our tradition, and our people. And obviously it is this love for Bulgarian culture traditions that open up his mind to a opportunity to go and do his doctoral study in Bulgaria. And just wanted to let you know that Bulgaria has, in Sofia in particular, very strong cultural tradition in theater. Going to theater for people in Sofia is just like going to a football game or baseball game in this town. In other words, theaters, at least in my memories, but also recently, after the transition, have been really, really a big venue for people to get together, to get inspired, to share good moments. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Ken Moskowitz, and he will tell us a beautiful story about Bulgaria after the Cold War, adopting deeply American culture, embracing American culture, and one way Bulgaria has done this is through American plays in the premier place that is the National Theater Ivan Vazov. Ken.
I really have to thank you. We may not know your background in the theater, in the academic world, but I think this audience also doesn't know how long you've been here. We know folks like me who've been in the foreign service know that a prized assignment like Washington is very hard to get. And there are a lot of people that want to get it when you're there. But the ambassador has been here for 6 years? That's right?
The second time.
The second time. So I think Sophia has realized that no one can do it as well as Elena Poptovodora. And we're really going to miss you because at some point soon you're going to have to go back.
Very soon too.
Very soon. So I'm glad the timing worked out and we can see you one more time.
And I'm happy it worked out that way.
Thank you. And Assen, I have actually, I have worked in the theater. I've been a volunteer in the theater consistently now for the past 3 years since I finished my last overseas assignment in Bulgaria. But I've been too frightened to go out in front of the cameras. I've been backstage. So, and the greatest difficulty of being in front of the cameras is you have to memorize things. And I don't know how to do it. You memorize a 3-hour play. So, of course, I have prepared remarks, which makes it a lot easier for me. Let me say something about Assen, too. I did meet Assen before I went to Bulgaria in 2009. And I quickly realized, apart from his professional expertise, he is the go-to guy for anything academic and scholarly and cultural in the Bulgarian world. And that's how he became president and head of the Bulgarian community here. He's also, as a non-Bulgarian, he's welcomed me warmly into that community. That doesn't always happen when you don't share any cultural background originally. I'm not from Bulgaria. And so if you want to know something about Bulgarian culture, and the names that came to mind when I was thinking about this, Sonia Yoncheva, the biggest hit in the Met, a young diva, or Valia Balkanska, who will blow you away if you hear her music, or Boris Christoph, an older, great Bulgarian opera singer. Assen's a person to talk to. And if you don't know any of those people, at least you have to know Christoph, who is the public name among the Bulgarian artists in the US. So, how did I get here? I'm going to say something about that. I have been doing public affairs for 30 years. I just retired from the State Department in September. When I went to Bulgaria, I had done about 25 years. And I was looking for something new. I was looking for something new in Bulgaria. So I actually wanted to get out of the routine of what I'd been doing for 25 years. And I was looking at theater. I was looking in the arts, which is my own passion. Very early on, the fall, that is several weeks after I arrived, I had the opportunity to have dinner with Edward Albee. You know as the author, not only of one of the plays that I'm studying here tonight, or the discussion here, but of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. So that gave me pause about, well, maybe we could do something with Albee. And trying to do Albee, but Albee in the US, Albee in Germany, and so on, too much trouble. Here, I was going to be in Bulgaria for 3 years, so I was looking for something with Albee in Bulgaria, and then how else can I do it while working here in Bulgaria? So that led me to follow a tip of my wife, which is work on a dissertation, which she thought I could do, and I thought she was crazy. But I did have to give up a lot of other things which I enjoyed, like the piano, but we did it. And I did it at the National Academy of Theater and Film Arts in Sofia, because that had the program that I was interested in. I can tell you about that. So, let's speak for like half an hour. I faced the challenge of how to do the research and write a dissertation while holding down a demanding full-time day job. These State Department jobs will also keep you at the office for 12 hours a day. Well, I had the academic connection. I didn't have a theater yet. So I found out quickly from a friend of mine at the Bulgarian National Theater, Ivan Vazov, that there was an American season coming up. And that was really just what I needed. They were doing a complete season, 5 American plays. That would allow me to focus on plays right there in Sofia. I wouldn't have to travel. I could study the plays in the original. I could study the plays in Bulgarian. I could meet all the people involved in the creative team, in the project. And it would be consistent with the work I was doing as a press and cultural officer. So the play that was being performed was The Goat. That was the 2002 Edward Albee play. It would open in the studio hall, the smaller hall of the National Theater. And for the other plays, I chose 2 of the 5, which were One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Angels in America. And briefly, I'll tell you something about these 3 plays, if you don't know them already. The Cuckoo's Nest was mounted on Broadway in 1963, written by Dale Wasserman, the author also of Man of La Mancha, based on the novel, big hit novel by Ken Kesey, which appeared the previous year, 1962. But we really know Cuckoo's Nest from that great Milos Forman movie, 1975, with Jack Nicholson. That's why Bulgarians know it too, and I'll come back to that. The story is something which was very much understood by Bulgarians. This rebellious McMurphy character who's a kind of a cut-up and doesn't follow the rules and doesn't play the game. And he goes to war basically with Nurse Ratched, who's also become a cultural icon in the West. The other figure is Chief Bromden. We'll say something about Bromden too. Second play, Angels in America, appeared in 1993. The National Theater only mounted the first part because it's a 5-hour play called Millennium Approaches, written by Tony Kushner. It's a very difficult, complicated play. It touches on AIDS, politics. It was daring for its time, rather raw in some of its scenes, but basically covers a couple of gay couples in New York, woven in many historical themes, which were difficult for Bulgarians to understand. And we'll come to that too, including the history and some angels and some spirits. The third play, as I mentioned, was by Edward Albee, The Goat, or Who is Sylvia? This one appeared in 2002 on Broadway. The main character is Martin. He's a 50-year-old celebrated architect, and he falls in love with a goat, which was shocking even for Albee, who was a provocateur. And it involves his wife Stevie and their son Billy, as in Billy Goat, because Albee's always playing with words. There's also a third character called Ross, who introduced him during the play, and Ross is the typical Albee best friend, who's not really a best friend, and rather hostile, but we'll find that out too. So my preference was not to do a kind of a literary study, but to do something practical, because I've been interested in working in the theater, as I said, backstage. And I wanted to see what the creative team would do with these three difficult plays. That is, you're Bulgarian, you speak a different language, you're in a different culture. What do you make of a play that was written with Americans in mind, with American characters? And we're going to leave aside the interpretation, the symbolism, the literary value, and so on. And we're going to look at how the creative teams, that is the director, producer, translator, actors, backstage technicians, what they did with it and why, what choices they made. So I ended up, as I said, at the National Academy. That's where they teach practical theater people in Sofia. They do the acting, the puppetry, set design, the lighting, and the film criticism. I sort of fit under dramaturgy, which is theater arts. And I wanted to go to the first slide. I had to write my dissertation, so I wrote these research questions. I didn't want this to be a talk about for an academic audience, so I'll just throw that up there. We'll leave that for a few minutes if it interests you, and if you have a question in Q&A, I'll turn back to it. But we're going to talk about something more broader, I think, that a general audience will understand or would appreciate. My topic became adaptation, as I've been saying in other words. How do you take an American play and make it Bulgarian? Have it make sense, have it be accessible to a Bulgarian public audience, not to an academic audience. There's a fairly broad academic literature on the topic of adaptation, but the preponderance of this literature is not about what I was doing, but about, say, taking a movie, making it into a book, a novelization, or taking the book and turning it into a movie, that is adapting it to the screen, which we hear about, turning the movie into a play, and so on. That's the case here. They took the Ken Kesey bestseller, everyone knew it, they knew it'd be a hit movie, so it became a great movie eventually. It also became a play even earlier. But what I was doing is something a little bit different. It's the study of cultural adaptation, not just switching from one medium to another. Cultural adaptation has two aspects. You're literally translating it from one language to another, and that involves the work of the translator and a few others. But your real goal is how to make the play understandable to a foreign audience. So these are textual changes as well as shifts in certain things like the setting, the props, generally the staging, how you're putting it on the stage, and then what they call equivalences. If there's something in the American brain, in the American context, that a Bulgarian is not going to understand, the creative team will meet and say, this is not going to go over, we're going to lose time, we're going to lose meaning, we're going to lose our audience. Let's find something equivalent in Bulgarian. It's very hard to do. But that's the theory anyway. A lot of things are added. If there's American music, you could use Bulgarian music. If there's a reference to an American sport, you could use a Bulgarian sport, and so on. You could add dance. You can do really whatever you want, so long as the playwright doesn't give you trouble. And we'll come back to that too. Some of them care and some of them don't. I'm going to give you a few examples from The Goat. The Goat is the Edward Albee, full of puns. If you had situational comedy, you could perhaps get away with it, slapstick or something. But this is verbal humor. And some of it's difficult for Americans too. So Albee has Martin, the architect, call his wife a bottle washer. Now, most Americans don't really know what this means because it's this arcane Albee language, but the expression comes from this chief cook and bottle washer. It's an old expression meaning basically you do everything from the chef to the laborer, you're my everything. He's always saying, you're my everything, you're my bottle washer. So what do? The whole exchange is dropped. It doesn't come into Bulgarian. They discussed it with Albee, who was there, and we just lost a little joke. There's also a line where there's a gay son. So the gay son is called gay is the 90s. So this is something an American would understand, gay 90s. This can't be translated either. It comes over as gay as Vila said, which is basically, gay, of course. So it conveys the idea that he's very gay, but you lose the pun. And I kind of wondered and worried, well, if they're losing all this humor, is it going to work out as well? And for the most part, it does, because there's a lot of these plays. There's another problem with the goat, and this is a problem with how people talk in Edward Albee plays, which is there's a lot of profanity. So, according to the translator that I talked to, he counted up what he called the F-bombs. 47 derivatives, he quote, 47 derivatives and variations of the F word, which educated Bulgarians don't use. So, how are you going to have an educated, award-winning architect be a believable Bulgarian with his educated wife, and you'll see the play takes place in a library using this sort of language, this coarse, kind of gutter language. So they go to, of course, to Albee. What can we do? Can we drop all this language? So with his authorization, they reduced the F-bombs to 27 from 47, all of which are toned down, but only 2 because, quote, the full and harsh meaning of executing the act. The drama calls for it. Those they had to leave in. There's also, pardon my French, a lot of the word bullshit. Now, this is a word they don't use either. So this is translated as gluposti. Gluposti is basically, bêtise is the best word, but nonsense, I think is what they usually say. Nonsense.
Correct.
Several degrees lower than the American original. So we're trying to keep the character as much as we can, but we want to make them credible Bulgarians. We want to make them believable Bulgarians. The director was a highly celebrated, really one of the most experienced and most loved Bulgarian directors, Alexander Morfov, and talked with him quite a bit. He claims that he did not use the Dale Wasserman play at all. He used the original book. He was very fond of the book. But what was one of the chief hits of the play was the voiceover by this Chief Bromden, who was a delusional Indian. Huge guy, you may remember. Has everyone seen the movie, I guess? Have you seen the movie? You know the movie? It's a great movie. But for Morfov to say that he didn't use the play to use the book, it skips one point, which is the book is written by Bromden. It's in the voice of Bromden. But the voiceovers are completely dropped. So when you ask Morfov, why don't you have the voice over? And he said, well, this doesn't work in Bulgarian. It doesn't make any sense, they're not going to understand it. But I also talked to Lee Sankiewicz. Lee Sankiewicz was the director of the first original successful mounting, not the 63 Broadway version, which was a flop, but a small theater production in San Francisco, which then became the basis. He changed a lot in the original production. That's the Cuckoo's Nest that we know now. That has all of the voiceover. And according to Sankiewicz, that was one of the best things, the most successful things. But if you look at the audience and the context, you understand why. You're in Haight-Ashbury, psychedelic San Francisco. You've got a delusional guy who's having hallucinations. It fits into the drug culture. So you can see you make changes for your audience. It was a huge hit for the drug culture in San Francisco. You don't need it in Bulgaria. Okay. Now, a little bit of the theory. There's 2 ways to adapt a play. According to the literature, you can't really square the circle. You have an American play. If you keep as close to the American play as you have, you come up with what's called a loyal or exotic adaptation. Loyal because you're loyal to the original vision of the writer, the playwright, and it's exotic because it's exotic to your local audience, which is Bulgarians. The risk there is the lack of accessibility. Your audience is not going to understand it, as we said. On the other hand, there is the alternative, which is the ethnocentric adaptation. This is ethnocentric, centric to your local audience and your local director and his wishes and his vision, his or her. What you risk there is a sort of distortion. As far as you go from the vision, that coherent whole of the original team and the original writer, then you're moving on to a new play. And if your playwright is alive, as Edward Albee is, and Edward Albee is rather possessive, he's not going to like it. So he was there actually monitoring the adaptation. And that's why it kept as close as it could to the play that he wrote without being completely inaccessible to the Bulgarian audience, the target audience, let's say. You can go one step further. The free or creative adaptation, this happens all over. When the playwright, when the director says, well, you know, I'm a creative person too. We have this text, I can keep to the text, but I have a lot of things I could input here. I have a lot of ideas, let's do something new. We don't want, especially if you're doing Shakespeare, or if you're doing Greek drama, we don't want a museum piece that made sense 1,000 years ago. We want something that makes sense today, 2016. Albee says, if you're going to be an auteur, director, if you're going to be a creative director, write your own play. Don't do it with my play. And he's actually gone to court to protect works that he's written so they don't become something different that he doesn't recognize anymore. To some degree, it has to reflect the passion of the new creative team. So again, you get often a hybrid, something in between. I should mention, since someone here is a friend of mine, is here from the Arlington Players. This is the community theater in Arlington where I've worked for 3 years. We mounted Comedy of Errors, a Shakespeare. And this is a typical sort of creative endeavor that you can put it in Ephesus in Greece, where Shakespeare puts it, or you can put it in Gangland, Chicago in the 1920s, which is where we put it. So you could have a nightclub, and you could have a torch singer, and you could have, well, the officials from the Ephesus government are now Chicago gangsters. So that was our creative adaptation. There was no Albee to complain about it. To come back to the great success that this director Morfov had with Cuckoo's Nest, he chose a pop star, Dejan Donkov, who played Dick Murphy. His characterization, more hard-edged, excuse me, than this, what we'd say a friendly, a fair-minded interpretation by Jack Nicholson that we know. And this could be a neutral interpretation, but there is a reason. I believe that Morfov chose Dejan Donkov in this interpretation, which is more aggressive than what we know. There's the most famous character, really, in Bulgarian literature is Baiganyo. And Baiganyo is, frankly, a sort of a con man who travels to Chicago and back. You can find the book by Kesey. It's in English. And the Baiganyo character, some Bulgarians have agreed to. There was probably something of the Baiganyo character, this sort of con man, a little bit of an everyman, but a wheeler-dealer where to Americans you think, because I've read it too, you think he's a little bit aggressive, not always friendly, not always somebody that you admire, but Bulgarians understand the problems that he deals with and why he makes the choices, why he acts the way he does. And there's a fair amount of Baiganyo in this interpretation by Donkov, who was a pop star already and became a huge hit in this role, and it became a huge hit play. So, interestingly enough, I also did audience surveys as people came out of the audiences, came out of the theater. And for the Americans, they did not find Donkov and McMurphy likable, as they found Randall McMurphy of Jack Nicholson not likable, but the Bulgarians did. That Baiganyo character was likable to them. Again, it was a brilliant adaptation. He made a character that speaks to the Bulgarian mindset or sensibility. As I mentioned, that the adapters can add material. What Morfov does, he adds music and he adds dance. And I do have a slide. This is the famous broom dance. This was picked up by all the critics. This is nothing that's in the original play. That's Donkov on the left. And these are all of the patients in the asylum across the stage, doing a little dance. The music that Morfov likes. He trusts himself. If he likes the music, and he uses Western music, he likes Metallica. It was a very loud Metallica. And the audience responds to it. The play, it's entertaining, it's fun, and according to Morfov, it does not violate the intention of the original work of Ken Kesey. So, I'm going to skip to the next play. It's a contrast to the work of Morfov in the example of Odessa Shpatova, who did a loyal, not a creative, and not an ethnocentric, but a loyal interpretation of Angels in America. This, as folks know who know Ken Kesey, it's a long 5-hour, long, dense, highly imaginative work, woven into American Cold War history. You have to know something about the AIDS epidemic and how the gay society reacted to it. There's a Mormon family, and there are characters out of the Cold War. And all of this in the play. So it's very difficult. There's a fair amount of explanation in the program, but it's still difficult for any audience. You compare that, again, to Morpho with Cuckoo's Nest. Cuckoo's Nest, from the very first page, this is a director who said, I'm going to the book, I'm not going to the play. If you look at the book, on the very first page, you have black orderlies. Racial tension is there on the first page. Now I'm going to show you a picture from this play, which has a black character in it. But what did Morpho do? No black characters. He just said, we don't have this problem here. Bulgarians will not understand it. We're going to look at something else. So ethnocentric, you look at Bulgarian problems, you look at universal issues and emotions, you get rid of all this American stuff. If you got rid of all that American stuff in Angels America, I'm not sure what you would have left. So it's all there. Here we go. This is an example to give you. I put this on the cover of my book. This is something very offensive to an American, but you have a character of blackface. This is what Kesey was faced with, is that the book is for sale. My publisher's reminding me, I have to mention the book will be set for sale. You have characters, black characters and gay characters, that are essential, pivotal to the play. You just can't wipe them off the stage. So that's how she did it. It reminded me of my first tour in the Foreign Service in Hungary in the late 80s. A local theater was putting on Porgy and Bess. Now, we knew that Porgy and Bess, in the will of George Gershwin, that it had to have a black cast. But we're in Hungary with no black actors, no black Hungarians. So what did they do? Everybody was in blackface. I don't have an answer for that, maybe someone does, but that's what she did, and it was kind of shocking. But at least she made an attempt to put this very American play on the stage in Bulgaria, an ethnocentric version. So I could say something, maybe I could drop off this. There's a little bit about the case of working with the Bulgarian actors. I got to know them all pretty well, the ones in these plays. A big difference between them and the American actors, speaking Bulgarian, they're not looking toward working in Hollywood or in the West. It's not their language. Very down to earth, very much a family society, very convivial place to work. And they're not getting rich acting on the stage in Bulgaria. There were a couple that were actually working in Western Europe too, where they were making bigger money, but they were loyal. The star, Martin, the architect in the Goat, had a Broadway, had a Paris gig, but came back every week to play a role back at the National Theatre in Sofia. So it's a small theater world. It also means that the criticism is a little bit less hard-edged. I know a friend of mine who's a critic in New York. He can't even meet these people socially, but they tend to know each other, and the criticism tends to be a little bit friendlier as a result. The economics are different too, that in Bulgaria, they always say every theater, every NGO, every artistic group is in permanent crisis. This was a phrase coined by Michael Kaiser, who was president of the Kennedy Center. But when I look at the crisis that he's under, with the millions of dollars that he can command, with the situation of Bulgarian theaters, it's scales of magnitude that are different. But the National Theatre has a privileged position in that it does get grants from the national government. This goes back to the communist era. That's why you can get, you saw the stage, big productions, really lavish by Bulgarian standards, where a lot of the community theater is a lot smaller scale, and they really struggle to mount the plays. It's a lot easier for the National Theatre. They don't do blockbusters. They don't do musicals. That's another theater. So they don't have the tourist trade. They don't have 10 million people in the capital. so they've got a smaller audience too. The plays really have to be good, but they've got a loyal audience. They've got middle-class people, they've got the theater people, and they've got the professional classes. A large, loyal audience that are members of the theater. So I wanted to look at these three plays, and given that they've been adapted, they've been changed quite a bit in some cases, how much success did they reach? So in the case of Cuckoo's Nest and The Goat, they had a great success. They played for many years. I believe that The Goat is still being mounted in the small theater, in the theater, in the studio theater. But Angels in America had a harder time. That's this one here, given that there's a lot that's even difficult for an American to understand. There's also a lot of American references. Not, well, really just in Angels in America. So there is one other aspect of Albee that I want to show you, which is this. So this is Martin, the architect, and that's his interviewer on the right. If you look at the books in the library, it says blank is the only one you can see. This is the sort of thing which causes cognitive dissonance for me. That is, they're speaking Bulgarian. Albee says, my characters are American, so they're both Bulgarian speaking, and yet they're in an American library. It's just for me, I don't know where they are. It's the hybrid. That's the, in the academic literature, Marvin Carlson and others write about that scale or spectrum of, are you very American? Are you very ethnocentric Bulgarian? Are you somewhere in between? And this is one where they're kind of swinging back and forth. Even though Albee says they're American, the irony is, if people know Albee, they're not really American. If you know one of his later hits, the second Pulitzer Prize winner, was Three Tall Women. The women are called A, B, and C. They don't even have American names. Here's a play called The Man with Three Arms, where the main character is called the Man. They don't even have names. They don't have American names. There is nothing, the great contrast between this great hit in Bulgaria, easy to adapt, and Angels in America. All the things that I mentioned, the Cold War and so on, McCarthyism that you have in Angels, this one has nothing American. There's not one American thing, not even baseball, which is mentioned in Cuckoo's Nest, is in this play. There's a Pritzker Prize, and Pritzker, of course, is the Secretary of Commerce. It's her family prize for an architectural award, which Martin wins. That's the only thing vaguely American in this play. It really is a kind of character of symbols, which is easy to adapt, and consequently, I think, a big one. Let's see what we can get. I think what did help, in my last slide, this is also from Angels. This is Harper. Harper is the wife of Joe Pitt, the Mormon, and she is addicted to drugs, and she's having hallucinations. You see the angel. She has a great visual sense. This is the sofa in her living room, and you can see she feels swallowed up by it. She feels threatened, and it's conveyed visually. So even though Desi Shpata, the director and the designer, had a very difficult job to do, they were able to convey a lot of the emotions visually this way. So that aside, I think I just want to say a couple closing remarks about why was Cuckoo's Nest so popular. There's something called in the literature a constituent audience. It's basically what we call in politics your base. So Morphow had a base. Morphow had a base like Tony Kushner had a base in New York. Tony Kushner had a gay base, and he had a political base, a leftist base. When you take Angels in America to Sofia, you don't have a leftist audience, and you don't have an openly gay audience that's going to come to your plays. But Morphow had a base because he was a very popular director. He was well known, unlike Shpatova, who was very young, in her 20s. And he also had a very popular play. He knew that everybody knew this famous movie. They knew the Randolph McMurphy role. They knew the Jack Nicholson performance. So he was going to get critical mass in that hall, whatever he did. And since he did a great job, it was a huge hit. So I don't really blame Desi, who really struggled with this, and I learned later had a very short time to mount the play because it was controversial whether to bring it over, and she had a shorter time to put the thing together than the other two playwrights. But one other really interesting comment by Morfov is this. Why did Milos Forman take this up? You know, Milos Forman was the Polish director of the movie. Does anyone have a guess why this was appealed to Forman, the Polish director? If you think about the theme, you want to tell me?
Czech. He's Czech.
Oh, did I say Polish? I'm sorry, Czech. Yes.
I had an interview at one time.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. But the question still holds. Why would this appeal to an East European?
Oh, well, because of the confinement, the asylum and everything else.
Yeah, but what were the Soviets doing? This was a Cold War hit. They were putting dissidents in mental institutions.
Sure. Yeah.
This is paralleled in the play and in the book, where they're taking someone who doesn't fit in, he's basically rebellious, and he's a dissident, and you're the problem. There's not a problem with the society, so he goes into the institution. There was a huge response to this in Bulgaria too. So that's why anybody mounting this play, I think, would have had a certain hit. Another interesting is, which I know is the difference with the US, is the idea of the dramaturg. Now, if you go to the theater here in Washington or New York the last 5 or 10 years, you're going to run into a dramaturg or a dramaturge. We don't know how to say it, because if you take the German, if you think German is dramaturg, if you think French is dramaturge. We don't have them because we don't really need them. A dramaturge, according to the dictionary, a specialist in dramaturgy is one who acts as a consultant to a theater company, advising them on possible repertoire. So, why did they have them? Why have they always had dramaturgs in Eastern Europe and we don't really need them? Because Bulgarian theater, like Czech theater and Polish theater, does a lot of imports. They do a lot of translation, they do a lot of cultural translation. And your dramaturge is your in-house scholar. This is someone who knows the foreign literature, who knows the language, who can make those translations for you. And if the playwright, the foreign playwright's alive, he's your liaison to the playwright too. So they have a list of things. They help with the translation, they help with the adaptation, linguistic and cultural. They do the textual work if it's Shakespeare. They find out what do these things like bottle washer mean, and so on. And let me close with one last idea. I'll turn it to Assen and questions. As a Foreign Service officer for 30 years at the end, I retired last year. You're always faced with this question: how much do you adapt? It's really an analog to what the theater is doing in adaptation. If you don't want to adapt, if you want to stay loyal to yourself, and if your integrity means I'm an American, like always says, I'm going to stay American, I'm going to be an American, you become a kind of ugly American where you only speak English, you only dress like an American, you only, when you go out to a restaurant, it's got to be a McDonald's and so on. Or what's the alternative? What is the equivalent of a ethnocentric? Well, that's going native, where you come into the office at the embassy and you speak only Bulgarian to your staff, and you dress in Bulgarian clothing. I mean, this works for certain people. I'm not going to make value judgments, but there is, for example, a well-known Finnish-American manga, which is a Japanese printmaker, who spent a lifetime doing these wonderful prints in Japan. He went native, married a Japanese, we all do that, but would dress as a Japanese and would live the Japanese lifestyle just to get inside the mindset to understand what it's like. So, you know, we don't go to that extreme, but to some degree we're hybrids. We're trying to be loyal to who we are and represent American society, but yet trying to get inside the Bulgarian, the Japanese, and so on, get inside their mindset to understand where they're coming from and to adapt, you know, basically. One last example here. You guys talk for a while, and I'll turn it over to Assen. I hope I've provoked you to perhaps raise a few questions or follow up on some of these ideas, so thank you.
Okay. The floor is now open. I'm sure there are many questions in your mind. Please. Please.
Well, thank you. That was really, really nice to hear. That was really cool. I have a question regarding the morph of Wonderful Really Cuckoo's mass production. I actually was living in Bulgaria last year, and on the history of psychiatry during the communist period during that year, and so it was really exciting for me to get to actually see a Bulgarian production which constituted the closest reference point that Bulgarians had for American psychiatry.
Right.
When I was talking about Soviet psychiatry in Bulgaria, people said, well, what about America? What about lobotomies? What about Kesey? What about
Right,
One Flew Over the
right.
Cuckoo's Nest? It was this really, like, this symbolic condensation of so many unsaid things. And I was really shocked by the production. I did not see anything that I saw coming. And you did talk about McMurphy a little bit, and I'm curious to know if you had any impressions from Nurse Ratched and the way that that role was, the analog that was captured. And I guess I'm just curious to hear your impression before mentioning what mine was.
Yeah. I did have some discussion with Rennie, the actress who played Ratched, and of course with Gorfov. Their view was, I think, the proper one, that she would not be a monster. That the audience would lose interest if it became a melodrama where he's all good and she's all bad. As we see, he's kind of aggressive himself. He's got an agenda, he's kind of nasty. She's really nasty and controlling, but she's got her issues and she's trying to cure people. She's trying to do her job. It's hard to do your job with a bunch of people like this. But you mentioned one other thing, we'll come back. But I talked to an American psychiatrist who worked at the embassy. He comes through. And they actually have a term in psychiatry called a ratchet. They recognize a kind of imperious, controlling figure as part of the psychology of Nurse Ratched.
Yeah, I felt that this kind of archetype that was created in the novel and in the film as well, which is this monstrous, controlling, maternal femininity, was completely changed in the play to be
softer.
Here's imagine a conflict between McMurphy and Nurse Ratched. Nurse Ratched's like, well, okay, well, fine. Well, okay. Oh, that's so frustrating, but fine.
Yeah.
And so she was always deferring and stepping out of the way.
Right.
And it made such an impression to me that she was displaced as being this anchoring element of power through which everything has to pass. And I wonder if there's a connection to just gender dynamics in Bulgaria and the way that, I don't know, how would a Bulgarian audience react to this monstrously powerful feminine figure?
Yeah. I'm probably not the right person to ask that question about the larger question of gender roles. Generally, people will accept that there's more macho culture in Bulgaria. It's a more male-dominated society. Perhaps my Bulgarian friends, Assen or someone else, could take that one up. I wasn't planning to use any of this, but I do have a photo of, I didn't want to use all my slides because I don't really like to use PowerPoint, but I have a picture of Ratched with, in the role, this is here, right. And at least I'll share this with you as I hold this up. You'll see that she's not a monster. She's with McMurphy. Who's the monster here? Does that ring a bell? You see? It's not quite the American movie. She's kind of soft, she's attractive. And look at him snarling. You don't really see that from Jack Nicholson. It's more balanced. You know, I just saw Madame Butterfly, the HD production from the Met, which comes here in sort of the Mazza Gallery. And they had an interview with the actor, the singer who plays Pinkerton. And Pinkerton, of course, if you know the story, he's the nasty, ugly American who pretends to marry this Japanese flower, this delicate flower, and then walks off immediately and never comes back, well, 3 years later, but not seriously. And he's often depicted as a monster. But he said in the interview that you'd lose interest if it became a melodrama of that sort. I think it's the same thing. I think a good director will try to humanize all the characters, find the human element even in the typically negative roles.
More questions, please.
Ken, as you know, I go back and forth between the U.S. and Japan, so I do a lot of translating in a broader context.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested if you could tell us what are the major lessons or conclusions you reached at as a result of doing this research, number one. What do you know after the research as opposed to before?
Yeah.
And number two, if you were asked by some future playwrights as a consultant as to what you should do, what are the major things you would advise?
Yeah. I'll tell you, I was thinking the second question I thought I would take to a theater, but then I realized the theaters that I've been in and I've been involved in are so much bigger than my role. It's hard to do that. But I'll tell you the most shocking conclusion I had, which is this. In the literature, they talk about equivalences. I mentioned equivalences, that something's not going to work, something American doesn't work in Bulgaria, but you find a similar joke or a similar character and you use that instead. They don't do that. They drop things. There was a lot of things dropped. What they add, the dance, for example, and the music, they added American things. Metallica is not a Bulgarian dance. It's not American music. There is, for example, world-class Bulgarian folk dance and folk music. None of those things are brought into the play. These equivalences don't work in the way that the literature thought, or led me to believe that it would. I'll give you another example. I mentioned the Black Orderlies in Cuckoo's Nest. You could have found an equivalent. You have a Roma problem. You have Muslim, Turkish, and Roma, Gypsy minorities, 15% in Bulgaria. You could have made the Roma the orderlies, just like they do a lot of labor jobs in Bulgaria, but Morfov didn't consider that at all. He just dropped the whole theme. What he said about Shvatova, too, when I asked him, well, why do you think this was difficult? He didn't say, oh, she has a more difficult job to do. He said she was trying to explain American things which Bulgarians don't understand, where she should have just dropped it, as he did, and worked on the universal human emotions. That is, find the universal in the particular. Now, we've heard that before, and I thought that would be true of these plays too, but I'm not sure that works in the goat, because there's not much particular in the goat. These are symbolic figures. They're like Albee and other modernist playwrights. Samuel Beckett, you have Waiting for Godot. This doesn't occur in the U.S. It doesn't occur in Europe. It's just it's an anywhere. It's an any man character. So that was the biggest surprise I had. As far as advice, I think there are many roads to success. You have a loyal adaptation in the case of The Goat, and you had a free adaptation in the case of Cuckoo's Nest, and they were both big successes. So there's no one size fits all. I would caution now, if you're going to do Angels in America, I would take it out of that big hall and put it in a little college theater or in a studio theater, maybe 150 seats, because you're not going to fill the big hall, not for several years.
More questions, please.
Well, I am a Romanian writer, and I happen to be the translator of Angels in America.
Wow.
And so the Romanian experience is literally opposite, completely opposite. But I don't know, there are very many things to say, so I wanted to ask you about this particular play. How long was it on stage? And did they really use the whole text?
They did. She didn't cut out anything. It was
didn't.
long, yeah. This is something maybe theater people here know this too in the U.S., but they've got this worry that when a play gets to be that long, they're supposed to have an intermission.
Yes.
And they're afraid that if they have an intermission, people will not come back.
What happened there? I will tell you in Bucharest.
Yeah.
It's very different.
Yeah.
In Bucharest, they didn't, the stage director is one of our very best. He has an extraordinary power of imagination and a sense of the metaphysical. Nothing was sacrificed. I was lucky to have having my American husband who helped me with some of the obscure hints. It was a huge challenge to do it well in Romanian because we didn't want to eliminate anything. You understand? It's very faithful. So, like with the Bulgarians, we do not have a lot of gay experience. I have some gay friends. I asked them some terms, Okay, it worked at the level of language. The stage director was kind of appalled here and there at the dirty language. hired this lady, I used it. And they did it in 2 evenings. It is a huge success. The 2 plays. I mean,
so
the 2.
in Bulgaria, they only did the first part. Millennium First. They didn't do Perestroika.
In Romania, they did both of them.
That's 5 hours.
Yeah, they did it in 2 evenings, and it managed to be this American product without local adaptations. As a translator, I will tell you that where the reference in American history, kind of recent history and so on, was too obscure, we just added 1 or 2 little words, very like fluid, in order to uncode what was behind. And it did work in this way. Now, it is true that the Romanian culture, as well as the Bulgarian, I'm not sure, because I studied a little bit in Balkan drama, they are director-centered. And so directors are the big boss, they will change anything.
Absolutely.
But you see, this case, in the case of this very important director, who also may have done his big changes otherwise, in this one he didn't, and it was incredibly successful. And not a national theater, well, a smaller theater in Bucharest.
You know,
So, well,
I guess you can do it. I know because Kushner, I did talk to Kushner. I interviewed him, and he is very flexible. He allows you to make the changes, unlike Albee. He said it shows the sturdiness of the play if you can make changes and it still works in a foreign culture.
well,
And he doesn't want to be doctrinaire about it. But I give
it
a lot of
was a
credit
huge
that he made it
experience, you know. It was so successful that there were broadcasts with the actors and the director, and with myself anyway. The young actors who were involved said it was like a process of initiation. They thought it was a huge mind opener. So this is what it was for the Romanian audience. Has been and still is. It's a recent experience.
I'm glad because I wanted to. There was something I didn't mention. Here's another adaptation of Angels in America. Do you know this? There is a Hungarian composer, Peter Eötvös in Bulgarian. Eötvös Péter. He did an opera version of Angels in America. It played in Paris at the Théâtre du Châtelet, 2004. So he took the whole 2 parts. He reworked it and condensed it. There was condensation in the other plays, not so much in this one. I timed them over the year, and for example, Cuckoo's Nest was cut down about 15 minutes from the beginning of the season to the end. So they're always trying to make it shorter and tighter.
Music has to do that.
Oh, but no, this was the play. This was Morfolk's version of Cuckoo's Nest. In the case of Eötvös, what he said recalled what Morfolk said about finding universal. This is a quote. In the opera version, I put less emphasis on the political line than Kushner. I'd rather focus on the passionate relationships, on the highly dramatic suspense of the wonderful text, on the permanently uncertain state of the visions. So this is, he seems to almost be following in a very strict way what Morfolk said, that Kesey, who did Angels, she got too caught up in the politics and the AIDS and all these other issues when she should have looked at the universal, according to this composer too.
Okay, interesting, case in Romania, and I know Bulgaria and Romania culturally are quite close in many ways.
They are very similar. So the countries are almost the same in theater things. So that's why.
Only Danube divides us in many ways. Okay, more questions, please.
Ken, I have a question about how the Bulgarian audience felt when they left. They came to each of these plays knowing that they would see an American play. Did they leave thinking, I've learned some new insights into American culture? Or did they leave thinking these are universal questions explored from an American point of view? What do you think?
I think most Bulgarians at that level that go to the National Theater already know a fair amount about American culture. They're not going to know who these Cold War figures are, and the Roosevelts, and these, Roy Cohn is a character in Angels in America. The program explains a little bit about that. We do that too. I heard that when they did Guys and Dolls in London the first time, they had to have a glossary of all the American terms. This is going from English to British English. So you can imagine going to Bulgaria from New York. So what I did is, that is, what is the audience reception? This is a big field of academic endeavor. The play is one thing. You can study the play. You can study the audience. What did they get out of it? Did they understand it? So I did questionnaires, and depending on how much time I had and so on. But I got responses from about 5 plays in each case. And I asked, the theater helped me distribute the questionnaires. I asked them questions such as, you can see it. Did you enjoy it? Do you think you understood it? Did you laugh at it? Did you think it was funny? And are the characters more American or more Bulgarian? And there's a little bit of the bar charts, you can see that. And they kind of track when people say they understood it, that they could follow it, they liked it too, especially when they thought it was funny. But you can see in each case, I'm not sure if it's clear, all this one little sort of snippet that I took out of the research, but they had the hardest time with Angels in America. Where did I see that? You see, when they understood it 100%. See? They don't always say they understand it. 100% in the case of Cuckoo's Nest and the Goat, but pretty close. They're at 97% said it's only one person who said that he or she didn't understand it. But only 70% enjoyed it. Angels in America. It's funny that it doesn't quite track. It's not intuitive, but more American. The highest is the Goat, which doesn't have anything American in it.
Okay, so Ken, if we do a small experiment, if we take this audience and make them learn Bulgarian overnight, take them to the gorgeous National Theater, do you think that this audience will have the same warm reception for the Cuckoo's Nest versus Angels in America, for example? In other words, you mentioned perhaps Morpho superstar in Sylvia, kind of person very talented, own view on many things, and Donkov, also beloved young pop star. And of course, those two things gave them the leverage to do whatever they want with Cuckoo's Nest. Will this audience enjoy the soup or the product that they prepare, for example? You mentioned that perhaps they may not.
Well, but the terms that you've set, that is, they're already educated Americans. They're going to be fully versed in Bulgaria. You're going to turn each and every one of them into an Ambassador Poptovodora.
Overnight.
No one can tell that she's Bulgarian. She's got perfectly inflected American English. I don't think they'd have any trouble with these. I think they would enjoy them. They're all good productions. These directors don't get to the level of the National Theater